Lauren Kimball for ANI 150, and in this tutorial we're going to lay out the UV maps on our crate. Now in this particular file, if I go up to the UV texture editor, you can see that I've already laid out the UVs for this particular mesh. Now I'm going to have to repack these eventually because I don't have the handle or the little embellishments that we modeled previously included in this map. But for right now, we're going to focus on just the core of the mesh. Okay, so I'm going to open up, I'm going to go ahead and open up a previous version. This is the version we left off on when we modeled the handle and the details. I'm going to add that handle into the detail layer and hide it with the rest of the details, like the little hinge and the little side pieces. I'm going to go under Show and turn off the grid. And then I'm going to go open up the UV editor and see what we have to work with. Now, when we modeled the cube, or not the cube, but the polygonal dice, when we modeled that for exercise 1, you probably noticed that the UVs weren't all that crazy, and that's because that low poly die just had edges that were beveled. There wasn't any significant changes to the mesh. However, if we click on this crate, that's all kinds of ugly. That is UV over UV over UV stacked, piled. If I turn on the shaded view, you can see some of them are flipped every which way and stretched and pulled. So needless to say, not ideal. So we're going to have to create some new ones. In some ways, this is going to be a little bit like the dice because this is a square or a cube type figure, but the sides and the top have these extra fixtures here, and it's going to add a level of complexity to our UV map process. So I'm going to begin with the bottom because that's really easy. I'm going to right click face, and a couple of options. I could go over here and click the paint selection tool. If you click the paint selection tool, you can hold down B and scale the brush, and that's pretty easy. You could just go in and kind of paint your selection. But you gotta kind of hope that if you do that, you don't accidentally paint other things like up here. Well, that's one way we could approach it. Another is clicking on a face and then shift clicking so that it selects all the faces that are next to it, kind of like an edge loop. You can just keep repeating that until you have all the faces selected. All right? It's funny to think that this little tiny box that kind of looks like an SD card is actually the bottom of this crate. All right, so this is just a flat piece, and the best map to use when mapping something flat is to go under Create and select Planar Map. Now I'm going to click on the little box and see which direction I'm facing. In this case, I'm facing the y-axis, so I'm going to want to make sure that it's set to the y-axis and apply. And there is the bottom of our, there's the bottom of our SciFi Crate. I'm going to go ahead and go into shaded view, which I can activate just by pressing 5, and you'll notice that it turns red. I'm going to right click and go to UV shell mode, which will allow me to select the UVs as a whole instead of the individual UVs or the faces or edges. And then I'm going to shift right click and flip along U. There we go. Now the UVs are facing the right way. Go back to 4, key 4, and just push this off to the side. All right. The next part is going to be the side, because the side looks pretty cut and dry. I'm going to go back out of UV shell mode and go into face mode. And I'm going to, let me make sure, okay, sorry. I'm going to start selecting geometry that's on the side. I'm not going to select anything that is underneath the lip right in here, because the way those UVs are laying, it's going to create some pretty awkward maps. And additionally, these surfaces, they don't require any real texture detail. We're not going to sit there and add lots of little details. So essentially it's almost like just UVs that you pick up and then tuck away. They're going to be UVs that take up the smallest amount of texture space, and they're basically just going to be a solid color of some sort. So I'm not worried about the inner lip. I'm worried about these faces out here, things that we're really going to be putting our attention on. So I'm going to shift, click here to here. Whoops, don't want to do that. Let me undo. Okay, click here, shift, double click there. That grabs all those faces. Shift, double click there, there, there. There we go. Press 4, make sure I didn't accidentally select anything that I didn't want to select. All right. I'm going to go ahead and select the other side as well, because these are identical. And so I'm going to go ahead and apply the same planar map and save myself a little bit of time. Okay. Now the side of this crate is a little tricky to select from the different viewports, which is why I'm going through the tedious process of selecting it this way. It's going to be much easier to select the sides and the top. All right, looks good. Make sure nothing is selected inside that area there. Good. All right, I'm going to go in here and go create, planar, go into the planar mapping options, and this time the sides of the box are facing on the z-axis, which we can check from the left corner of our screen. So click on Z and project. And there are the sides of our crate. If I right click and ask for the UV shells, grab both these shells, move it over here to the side. And I'm going to turn on my shaded view, and I see that because one side of this mesh was facing a different direction, it caused the UV map to be flipped. So I'm going to grab these UVs, shift right click, and flip along U. And now they're facing the right direction. And we are pretty much done with the sides and the bottom. All right, so inside this hunk of mess of UVs, we're going to find the tops and the sides of this mesh. Ooh, let's turn that off. That's not fun to look at. All right, I'm going to go into my side view, right click on face, and I'm going to select all these faces. I'm going to hold down Control and grab right along there so that I deselect most of these. Spacebar, go into this view. Now this area right here, this was all part of the side, so I'm going to Control, double click, and deselect, just like I would select an edge, only instead of holding down Shift, I hold down Control. I'll do that again here, Control click, and double click Control, and it deselects. Go back into that side view, and I can see the polygon faces that are extruded inward. And again, I'm going to hold down Control and deselect those faces, just like that. All right. All right, so I could planar map this, but if I did, then all these little indentions that are facing the opposite direction would be flattened. You wouldn't be able to see them because they're not facing the x-axis like the rest of this. So instead, I'm going to go Create and Automatic Map. And that's going to basically take all of these pieces and apply the most appropriate map to it. And it does leave it in a lot of pieces, as you can see, but we're going to put those pieces together. All right, so now that I've done that, I'm going to go back into the side view and I'm going to repeat the process on the other side of this crate. Oops, I held Shift instead of Control. All right, go in there, hold down my Control key, double click, do that again, Control, and then double click Control, there. Go back into that side view, zoom in on where the faces are extruded inward that make the lip, press Control and drop them. Alright, and then like before, I'm just going to go create automatic mapping. It does leave me with a mess of pieces, but it'll work out in the end. Just hang tight. Okay, now we're going to be focusing on the lid. Alright, so with the lid, start here, shift click, kind of use that same method as the bottom of the crate and on the sides, just because this little flattened area here is really hard to select from the side. Alright, make sure that everything is selected. We do not want to accidentally, if you're following along with this particular crate, you want to be careful not to grab these because I applied them to the sides instead, or the front and back instead of the top. Alright, everything looks good to go, and just like the front and back, we're going to go ahead and make that an automatic map. And again, it's a hot mess, but we're going to go ahead and sew those pieces together. Alright, the last bit is going to be this inner lip that we waited on. I'm going to shift click it, shift click here, so I have them selected, and I'm going to go ahead and automatic map those as well. And then I'm going to push these off to the side, and we will deal with those later. And that is the first step to laying out our UVs. We did planar maps on the bottom shell, so I'm going to go into shell mode. So for the bottom shell, and we can kind of see all the pieces we've made if we turn on this texture borders that shows us the borders on our UV maps, so you can see all the pieces we've created so far. So far, let me turn that off, it's a little distracting. We created the bottom, the two sides, we've mapped out the inner lip, and the front, back, and top. So our next tutorial, we're going to go ahead and start sewing these together and packing them.